Hi, Hugh Ross here. I want to thank you for joining us for part 4 of this series. In this section, we'll discuss the origin of life, specifically the 3 origins of life that the Bible talks about: the origin of physical life, soulish life, and spiritual life. And in this one, I'll be talking about the origin of the soulish animals, the animals that God created to serve and please human beings. Tonight's theme is going to be on the origin of the nephesh. That's the Hebrew word for the soulish animals. And the debate over the origin of life until this point in time has focused on the origin of physical life. But Genesis 1 actually speaks about 3 separate origins of life. The word bara, to create something brand new that never existed before, is used only 3 times in Genesis chapter 1. Once for the universe, that would include the creation of physical life. The second time is for the creation of soulish life, and soulish life is defined in the Old Testament as those creatures that are endowed with mind, will, and emotions so that they can relate to one another and nurture one another, but also relate to human beings. Those are the nephesh. And then last of all, Genesis 1 speaks about the origin of spiritual life. So from a biblical perspective, there are 3 origins of life: the origin of physical life, the origin of soulish life, and the origin of spiritual life. And one of the reasons why I want to focus on the origin of soulish life, it's a forgotten apologetic tool. It's like whenever non-Christians and Christians get together to debate creation issue, that never comes up. But I'm going to try to show you tonight that this is one of the most powerful tools we can develop to demonstrate that the God of the Bible is the creator of the universe and all life on planet Earth. Now, to kind of set up the 5th day, which talks about the origin of the soulish life, 5th and 6th day, I'm going to review a little bit about what Jeff shared with us concerning day 4. Day 4 is let there be the great lights. This is the first time that creatures on the surface of planet Earth can see the positions of the sun, moon, and stars. And what's taking place here is the atmosphere is being transformed from a translucent condition to a transparent condition. If you got up at 6 a.m. this morning and looked outside your little window, you would have seen a translucent sky. In fact, as I did a run this morning around deck 3, I noticed that I couldn't see the end of the boat from one other end because of the translucency of the sky. But now the sky is transparent. You can actually see where the sun is in the sky. But as we look at creation day 4, the interesting thing is it demarks a difference between the animals. Because on days 1, 2, and 3, all we see the text mentioning are animals that do not require knowledge of the position of the sun, moon, and stars. But in creation days 5 and 6, the only creatures that are being described as God bringing into existence are those that must see the positions of the sun, moon, and stars, at least on occasion, in order to regulate their complex biological clocks. These are the creatures that must reproduce at the right time of the year, migrate and hibernate at the right time of the year. Bacteria don't care where the sun, moon, and stars are, but the more advanced animals must have that information. So the 4th day is for the benefit of all the creatures that God will create on days 5 and 6. And as we go into the 5th day, it first speaks about the emergence of small sea animals. And we, had reasons to believe, consider this to be a reference to the Cambrian explosion, when God suddenly brings into existence, after the second great oxygenation event, where the oxygen content goes up to about 10%. That's the first time he got enough oxygen for large-bodied land animals. And then as soon as that oxygen reaches that level, God steps on the scene and produces this huge plethora of large-bodied animals. Appendages show up for the first time. Organs show up for the first time. Several dozen phyla of life all show up virtually instantaneously at the beginning of creation day 5, which would date back about 543 million years ago. And what you see here are trilobites. We visited the Burgess Shale, Kathy and I, last summer, and took these photographs of these trilobite creatures. And literally, as you walk on the Burgess Shale, it's like almost every second or third piece of shale as fossils from the Cambrian explosion. And then we move into the latter part of day 5, and for the second time only, Genesis 1 uses the word create, the word bara, to create something brand new that didn't exist before. And these are the birds and the sea mammals. And for the first time, we have creatures on the face of the earth that are not only physical, but they're soulish in the way they can relate to one another and nurture one another. Now, Genesis 1 does not speak of God creating land mammals generically. You're getting the highlights in Genesis 1. If you really want the scientific details, go to Psalm 104, Job 38, Job 39, and Proverbs 8. You're simply getting the highlights in Genesis 1. And so it skips over God creating the first land mammals and actually speaks about 3 advanced kinds or specialized kinds of land mammals. And essentially what's going on here in day 6, it's focusing on 3 categories of land mammals that God specially created to cohabit the planet with human beings and to specifically serve the needs of humanity. So God creates them first, then later he brings human beings upon the scene. And the 3 that it mentions are the short-legged land mammals. These are the rodents. You say, what on earth do we need rodents for? But rodents were critical for the launch of human civilization. What's special about these rodents, they're small-bodied creatures. And because they're such small-bodied creatures and they are warm-blooded, they have the problem that they radiate tremendous amounts of heat to their environment. And in order to keep enough heat inside that little body so that they don't freeze to death and die, it's essential that they have a lot of fur. And the farther north you go, the more fur they need to have. And so this is a muskrat, common to Alaska and Canada and Siberia. And these are creatures that spend a good chunk of their food supply simply making fur. Well, these are the creatures that the first humans exploited to make clothing. After all, they're easy to tame, and they're easy to feed. They'll eat almost anything, and you can keep them in pens. And almost everything you feed them, well, not everything, but a good chunk of what you feed them goes to making fur. So these are the most efficient fur-making creatures on the face of the planet. And they were crucial for the first humans because that was really their only source of the clothing at the very beginning. But what's remarkable about these creatures is they not only serve the needs of humanity at the launch of human civilization, they're also serving our needs today when we're near the end of human civilization. In the sense that God designed these rodents with DNA that's very similar to human DNA. And because of how similar their DNA is to our DNA, we can use these creatures for medical experiments. So thanks to rodents, we have medical advances today that are extending the lifespans of each one of us. I am here in front of you because of medical advances that were achieved because of research on rodents. I wouldn't be alive today if it wasn't for these rodents. And I think many of you in the audience likewise can testify of how you've benefited from these rodents. And again, they're designed not only with DNA that's remarkably similar to ours, they're very easy to keep as lab animals. I mean, I've seen labs where they've got 10,000 rodents in just one building. And they have them all cataloged. And see, they're easy to take care of. They're easy to get along with. And they don't mind being kept in little pens. And they like being herded together. They're really the ideal lab animal. And they're small enough that you can put 10,000 in a single building. Well, the short-legged land mammals is type 1. The second one that the text mentions are the long-legged land mammals of 2 types. It mentions the long-legged land mammals, or the beasts. This is referring to the easy-to-tame long-legged land mammals. And these are the creatures that early humanity exploited for launching agriculture, and even to this day, our society is heavily dependent upon these long-legged land mammals that are easy to tame. They're herbivores, which means they're cheap to feed, and again, they don't mind being herded together. They give us milk, they give us meat, the hides we can use for making leather, and the horns we can use for musical instruments. And so We are grateful for these creatures and the way they sustain our agricultural economy. And then we have the long-legged land mammals that are difficult to tame. And these are the carnivores. Now, they're difficult to tame. I mean, if you were to try to tame a wolf in the wild, it will typically take you almost a year before it will become completely tame. But if you raise it from the time it's a little puppy, it's quite easy to tame. And we benefit from these creatures not because they can serve our agricultural needs. As it says in the book of Job, these are the creatures that God gave us to serve us and to please us. And so the long-legged land mammals that are difficult to tame, the carnivores, God made them to bring pleasure and joy in our lives. And I think, the Ranas have gone through 23 of these creatures, so they must have a lot of pleasure going on in their home. Or maybe it's frustration. It determines how you relate to these creatures. But they love to entertain us. And the wonderful thing about these carnivores is you can housebreak them. You can't do that with these long-legged herbivores. No one's ever been able to housebreak a cow, so you don't want to bring a cow into your home. But these carnivores, they're relatively easy to housebreak. And the other thing that we particularly appreciate in our household, they only need 2 minutes to take care of their nutritional needs for the day. And in fact, I know a friend who's got a dog that only needs 30 seconds to take care of his nutritional needs. And the rest of the day, they're free to entertain the family. Whereas these herbivores literally got to spend all day eating and defecating and expelling noxious fumes into the atmosphere. But for agricultural needs, they're just perfect. Now, what we see here in Genesis 1 is a broad survey of how God created these creatures to bring service and pleasure to the human species. If you go to the book of Job, Job 38 and 39, it expands on what we see there in Genesis 1. It expands on the Genesis 1 message that God created these soulish animals to serve and please us, each in its own particular way. What I'm going to be revealing to you in the next few minutes is just how distinctive these different species of birds and mammals are in the way they bring us either pleasure or service or both. But my main motivation here is to show you how these creatures can challenge the atheistic worldview, the non-theistic or the naturalistic worldview, because the Bible claims that God designed these soulish creatures to serve and please human beings before we humans even existed. From an evolutionary perspective, you'd have to argue these creatures adapted to us. They evolved to serve and please us, but we weren't even here. They were designed that way in advance of our appearing. So from a naturalistic perspective, there's no answer to the specific ways they serve and please us. And what we're going to see is that these creatures will do things with human beings they don't even do with one another, demonstrating that they really were designed in advance to serve us in specific ways. And so this gives us a new opportunity for an apologetics argument. A new untapped apologetics tool is the origin, structure, and operation of the distinct souls that we see in the different species of Nefesh life. Now, this is a topic of interest for none other than Charles Darwin. But Charles Darwin naively presumed that there is a naturalistic explanation, a naturalistic origin for the soul and for the human mind. And he wrote about this in his book, Descent of Man. And one quote from that book is that differences between human and non-human minds is simply one of degree and not of kind. In other words, what he was saying is that we human beings are simply evolved animals. There's nothing distinctive about us with respect to these birds and mammals. And what proof did he offer? As proof, he said, quote, "There is a much wider interval in mental power between one of the lowest fishes and one of the higher apes than between an ape and a man." Now, I would agree with this statement because Genesis 1 tells us that the fish had no soulishness whatsoever. Their soulish quotient would be 0. whereas an ape does not have a 0 Soulish quotient, and of course we human beings have a much higher one. So in that context, Charles Darwin is right. Where he was wrong was in presuming that the fish is just as soulish as an ape is. It's not. It doesn't have a soul at all. Only the ape would have a soul. But what's been happening in the last several months, and only the last several months, is that scientists are now putting to the test Charles Darwin's ideas that he published in Descent of Man. And in particular, we have this article that's been published by Bolgius and Wynne in the April 16, 2009 issue of Nature. Now, what they say in this paper is that, like Charles Darwin, biologists today have tended to assume that species with shared ancestry will have similar cognitive abilities. So, for example, the presumption is that the chimpanzee and this intelligent football player here evolved from a common ancestor, and the chimpanzee would be the closest to matching the intellectual capabilities of this particular football player. But in a paper titled, "Can Evolution Explain How Minds Work?" two biologists write that, well, let me just kind of show you this first. That what they write about is the raven. And they were able to demonstrate that the raven far surpasses the chimpanzee in intellectual capability. For example, ravens, unlike chimpanzees, can use a tool to recover some food. Now, a chimpanzee can do that, but only after it's been trained by a human that has a very close relationship with that chimpanzee, and it takes nearly a year for that human to train the chimpanzee to pull it off. The raven picks it up without any training whatsoever. Can automatically do that repeatedly. Different tools to recover, different kinds of tools to recover some food. And also, ravens far outsurpass chimpanzees in their ability to solve problems. My father had a pet raven, and one thing he told me about his pet raven, and there's no way you can keep it in a cage. It will figure how to get out of the cage. So he just decided, forget about the cage, just let the raven run free, and he trained the raven not to mess up certain parts of his home. But no evolutionist would claim that the chimpanzee evolved into a raven, which evolved into this creature over here. No evolutionary model would make that claim. Well, in this paper, these two biologists point out an enormous discontinuity between human beings, chimpanzees, and ravens. As smart as the raven is, there's still a tremendous discontinuity between the way the mind of a raven works and the way the mind of a human works. And so, for example, and what's interesting is that 3 UCLA neuroscientists titled their paper "Darwin's Mistake." And what they pointed out is that Darwin made a huge error in his book, Descent with Modification. And this is a quote from them, that there's a significant discontinuity in the degree to which human and non-human animals are able to approximate the higher order systematic relational capabilities of a physical symbol system. Don't you love the way these neuroscientists come up with their sentences? I think they need an editor here. It's really not that complicated. But the point here is that, unlike Kathy, my wife, no animal can appreciate the meaning, the beauty, and the elegance of these wonderful equations of the Higgs field. But it's not just the Higgs field equations. The truth is that no animal can read the first page of the first Fun with Dick and Jane reader. Every human can do this, but not a single animal is capable of it. Moreover, no animal can respond to the significance of these symbols. Every one of us in this room knows what these 9 symbols mean and can respond accordingly, but not a single animal is able to determine what the symbol means and react accordingly. And so Penn et al. Conclude in their paper, we show that the symbol relational discontinuity pervades nearly every domain of cognition. In other words, there's this distinction between being able to deal and respond to symbols that pervades the entire scope of symbol communication. The animals have 0 capacity in that context. We human beings are able to function at all levels of symbol cognition and response to that. But I want to kind of segue to what I think is even a more amazing discovery. And it has to do with birds and cockatoos. And I want to introduce you to this cockatoo. He's now famous. This is Snowball, and you can visit him on YouTube. It's probably the most visited YouTube site for any animal that's been up there. And what happened is that this YouTube video clip shows this bird dancing to music. Now, a number of birds dance to music, and the researchers at UC San Diego actually flew out to Indiana where this bird lived because they were suspicious that the human owner was simply standing back from the camera and giving cues to the bird so it would respond appropriately. So they actually went out to Indiana and put the owner off to the side, and what they did is they varied the tempo of the beat of the music. And what they discovered is without any human signals whatsoever, this cockatoo was able to immediately respond to the changes in the tempo of the beat. In other words, this is a bird that actually had within it the capacity, the natural capacity to dance to music. And just to give you some context, this is a bird that was owned by a teenage girl who was really into the Backstreet Boys. She was just playing the Backstreet Boys all the time, and she was dancing to the Backstreet Boys. And this cockatoo was so strongly emotionally bonded to this girl that it simply picked up on what she enjoyed. And anyway, you'll see the clip. Let me just show it for you. And Snowball, what's interesting too is that YouTube is now so extensive a database that people are actually publishing research papers on it. And a group of graduate students actually surveyed the entire YouTube database and came up with nearly 1,500 video clips of animals dancing to music and being able to dance in response to the change of the tempo. And the list includes parrots, conures, which are basically small parrots, and even elephants. There's an Asian elephant that's able to dance. Now, it can't dance to the kind of music that parrots can, but it's able to imitate any kind of truck that goes by. So it can do an 18-wheeler, a 24-wheeler, or a 12-wheeler, whatever. Is able to imitate the sound of the air brakes. It can do all that. But what this research paper determined is that only vocal mimics showed evidence for entrainment. That's a technical term for being able to dance to a beat. And so if a creature is capable of mimicking human sounds, and by the way, it doesn't count to be able to mimic animal sounds. What we mean by vocal mimics are creatures that are able to mimic human spoken speech or music or the sounds of their vehicles or their equipment. But only these creatures are capable of dancing to a beat, and moreover, they only do it if they have a relationship with a human being. They do not do it in the wild. They only do it when there's a strong emotional bond with a human being. Now, I probably should have published this myself many decades ago because I had a little parrot when I was growing up, and his name was Pedro. He's actually a conure. And without any encouragement from me, he potty trained himself because he would sit on my shoulder and quickly figured I didn't like him messing up my shirts. And so he would do a little gentle tug on my earlobe, and I would put him on his little tree, and he would do his thing, and then he'd pop back onto my shoulder. And once he got that figured out, I never had a messed up shirt from that time forward. And also, when I get up in the morning and come down for breakfast, he'd hop on my shoulder, and he would notice that I missed a few spots with my razor, and so he would clean that up with his beak. And so I always had a shave. And if I were to open my mouth, he'd also clean my teeth for me. But the thing that really annoyed my parents is, my grandfather came to visit, and he really loved contract bridge. So he taught me how to play contract bridge, and we all played contract bridge, and the bird would sit on my shoulder while we were playing. And every time I won a hand of bridge, he would do a little dance and sing. And my parents would say, it's bad enough losing to our son at contract bridge. The worst thing is his bird gloats. What pertains to the research done on Snowball is that my sisters would play this kind of rock music back in the 60s that I really didn't like at all. And because the bird was so strongly bonded to me, it would throw a hissy fit every time my sisters played their rock music. Now, when I played my classical music, it would sway and bob its head just like that. It wouldn't kick its feet, but it would sway and bob its head like snowballing. Canoers aren't that good at being able to do the high kicks, and especially like Bach. But what was really going on is because of the bonded relationship that Bird had with me, he was simply responding to my dislikes and my likes. At that time, my favorite musician was Bach, so it kind of picked up on that. Knew I didn't like my sister's music, so it would throw a hissy fit whenever they played their music, much to the chagrin of my sisters. And experiments have been done extensively on parrots. And in a research paper published in Science Now in April 30th of 2009, Patel said parrots haven't been shown to dance to a beat in the wild, even to the songs of their courtship displays. So even when they're doing their courtship songs, there's no dancing to the beat. It only happens when they're strongly emotionally bonded to a particular human being. And they always respond to the music that human being likes best of all. And therefore that cockatoo doesn't really like the Backstreet Boys, it simply likes a teenage girl and responds to what she likes. But notice the significance here. These are creatures that are doing things with us that they don't do with any other species of life, not even their own species. So it's a piece of evidence, one piece of scientifically documented evidence that these creatures really were designed in advance to serve and to please us in particular ways. Now, what you'll see in Job 38 and 39, it shows how crucial certain soulish animals were for the launch of human civilization. And basically what you get in Job 38 and 39 is a top 10 list. Now here's a little secret in terms of being able to interpret the Bible. Whenever you see a list, there's a reason for what's mentioned in that list. When you read a genealogy, notice no genealogy in the Bible is exhaustively complete. Certain names are selected out. There's a reason for the names that are selected. Maybe the focus is on women. Maybe the focus is on Gentiles. There's a theological point being made in every single physical list in the Bible. And Job 38 and 39 are no exception. It mentions 10 different soulish animals: the lion, the raven, the goat, the deer, the donkey, the ox, the ostrich, the horse, the hawk, and the eagle. Now, why these 10? These are the 10 that were most significant in serving the needs of humanity and bringing pleasure to humanity, both at the launch of human civilization and towards the end of human civilization. Why am I referring to the end? Well, it tells us in Matthew 28, the Lord will return the moment we fulfill the Great Commission. And the fascinating thing is in the year 1900, 2% of the world's population could be classified as people committed to the fulfillment of a Great Commission. By 1950, that figure hit 3%. 1980, 6%. Today it stands around 16%. I think we are approaching that time when the Lord will return. And what's interesting about these 10 different birds and mammals, they were designed in a special way to meet our needs and to bring us pleasure at the launch of human civilization, and also in a distinctly different way at the end of human civilization. I'm not going to have time to go through this in detail. This is kind of the theme of the next book I'm working on, but let me give you just a few highlights of what's going on. The first creature that's mentioned is the lion. Now you say, why is the lion mentioned first? After all, it's not an agricultural creature. But what we notice about the lion, amongst all the long-legged mammals that are difficult to tame, is that this is the one that makes the most affectionate pet. So if you want a very affectionate pet, then a lion's the one that you want. But they tend to eat a lot. There's not that many around. You really can't go to a pet store and buy a lion. Although a few decades ago you could, and a number of people did. And for example, when I was a postdoctoral fellow at Caltech in the 1970s, there was an undergraduate who actually bought a lion cub at a pet store and raised it from the time it was cub. And that lion would go with him to Caltech every single day. And so there's no leash or anything. The lion would just kind of accompany him and go into the lecture hall and sit beside him. And you can imagine how the professors all felt with this lion there. A little bit terrified about giving that student a failing grade. But what I remember about that particular lion is how much it enjoyed the lunch hour break, because that's when this undergraduate would bring him out onto this big Caltech lawn, and all these little children would gather around and play with the lion. I remember one time seeing about 20 tots all clambering over this lion. The lion would roll over. We just really enjoyed it. In fact, enjoyed it so much that it was time to go home in the evening, the lion would balk. I remember, because this student had this little truck, and with a little ramp, and would try to get the lion to go into the truck so he could go home. And if there was a lot of people around, that lioness did not want to get in the truck. Actually was begging, can I spend more time with all these people out here? Now, the lioness has been known for many millennia as being an excellent pet because of its capacity to relate to human beings and to show affection. What's more unusual is to see it with a male lion. I got a photograph here of a male lion, and the thing about male lions are they're territorial. After all, in the wild, the male lion's job is to protect the territory of the pride. And the way it protects its territory is it fights off the other lions, and it marks its territory. And if human beings relate to such a creature, it likes to mark its human owner. So the problem with having a male lion for a pet is you're likely to get squirted several times with a powerful jet stream of urine. So, but if you raise a male lion from the time it's a tiny cub, you can break the lion of that behavior. And so I've got another little video clip here, and this is the story of Christian the lion. And it's a male lion raised from a cub by a couple of British young men, and it got to a point where, and by the way, it was called Christian because they lived in an apartment. Imagine having a male lion when you live in an apartment. But they made a deal with the local vicar, and every day would exercise the lion in the courtyard of the church, and that's how it got its name Christian. But it reached a point where it was costing $500 a week for them to feed this lion. After all, it gets to be 450 pounds and needs to eat a lot. And they couldn't afford it anymore, so they contacted the Adamsons. I don't know how many have ever seen that movie, Born Free. Well, those are the Addisons that took a female lion and returned it to the wild. And they agreed to take Christian and return it back to the wild. And so the Adamsons worked with this lion for a year and eventually got it rehabilitated. And this particular lion became the leader of a pride of lions. But the two young British guys decided after a couple of years they would try to find their lion. They went to Africa to find their lion. And with the Addisons' help, they were actually able to locate this lion. And after being away from it for a couple of years, this is what happened. Well, you can go on YouTube and see the longer version of that clip. What actually happens is this Christian takes these two young men back to his pride, introduces them to all of his female lions and all of his cubs. And the amazing thing is these wild lions that have had no contact with human beings because of Christian immediately allow these two Brits to hug and pet all of the adult female lions and even all of the cubs. So again, the lioness, the lion, the most affectionate of all the creatures. And we've already talked about the raven, who's really the smartest pet that you can possibly get. And a neat thing too about ravens is that they don't mind being close to us even in the wild. I mean, everywhere you go here in Alaska you see ravens, and probably every one of you in the cities that you live in will notice that ravens are very comfortable living even in heavily populated areas. And how they serve our needs today, I mean, they still make great pets. I mean, if you really want a smart pet, this is the one to get. They love to show off how smart they are. So anyone who's got a pet raven, they just love to do little puzzle tricks for you, showing you how clever they really are, and they seem to get a real kick at proving just how smart or how high their bird IQ is. But the other thing that they do in terms of service to us, these are the creatures that take care of all of our roadkill. It's like God seemed to know in advance that we would be driving these high-speed vehicles and causing all kinds of problems on our highways. But because these creatures don't mind living very close to us, they quickly adapted to that, and they basically clean up all of our roadkill for us. So thank God for God making the raven. And then we move into Job 39, and it mentions the goat. And of all the soulish animals that God has given us, this is the creature that's easiest to tame. And I don't know how many of you have ever been out in the mountains of Alaska or Canada, and I think you can even experience this in certain parts of Montana and the state of Washington. You can run into these wild goats, these wild mountain goats, and they literally will come up to you and actually want affection from you within a few seconds. My wife and I saw this in one of our trips where these two goats just kind of bumped into our backs and they wanted us to pet their heads. Wild goats. And I thought they were after our lunch, but really they wanted to nibble on our clothes. So that's the neat thing too about goats. They will eat anything, literally anything. They will consume, so they're cheap to maintain. And because they're so easy to tame, they paved the way for agriculture. Studies now demonstrate that the goat was the first creature that human beings had ever domesticated. Large-scale domestication of goats dates back to nearly 11,000 years ago. And how they paved the way, the goat is a creature that produces wool and milk, leather, meat, and horns. So it gives you 5 different agricultural products. It's not the best wool producer or the best milk producer or the best meat producer or leather or horn producer, but it gives you all 5. And because it does that, it kind of paved the way for humans to domesticate other herbivore mammals that were better at, say, the goat than making wool, or better at making meat. And so without them, it's really doubtful that human beings would ever have launched animal husbandry, because they're so incredibly easy to tame and have such a strong affinity for human beings. In fact, I think goats would rather be around us than other goats. In fact, I got to discover that when I first went to school at age 5, and a wild goat came behind me back home. My mother says, "Where did you get that goat from?" But this goat literally followed me all the way back home to our house and tried to get inside our house. And my parents weren't too keen about that. But it just shows you the strong affinity they have for human beings. And where did this come from? You cannot explain that affinity from an evolutionary perspective. They were designed in advance to kind of break open the door to launch animal husbandry. And without animal husbandry, we wouldn't have the technology that we have today. But they're meeting our needs today in a very distinct way. I mean, what's the problem with the urbanization of the United States and Canada is that we have our cities surrounded by these grassy and forested areas that tend to burn up quite easily, especially when you've got so much of the area carved out for urbanization. And so where we live, for example, in the Los Angeles area, we're dealing with forests and grass fires all the time. But this is a problem that's common to many communities within the United States. And we've now discovered that rather than using bulldozers to clear land around our cities or to make fire breaks up and down our mountains, it's far cheaper and much more efficient to use goats. Again, they'll eat anything. You want them to eat chaparral? They'll eat chaparral. You want them to eat grass? They'll eat grass. Want to eat the bark off trees? They'll take care of that too. They'll basically point out to them what they want them to eat, and they'll eat exactly what you want them to eat, and they'll be able to carve out a nice little fire break so that you can protect your mountains. And notice how sure-footed these creatures are. If you've got a mountain slope that's 65 degrees, they don't mind going up that 65-degree slope and clearing out all the vegetation for you. A bulldozer can't do that, but a goat can. And so it's meeting our needs in a special way in the 21st century. Now, the next creature that's mentioned is the deer. Deer, like goats, are easy to tame. Well, not as easy to tame as goats, but I took this shot from about 30 inches away, so it shows you that wild goats can really be tamed quite easily. And there are people who have deer farms, but the difficulty with trying to have a deer farm like you would with sheep or with cows is that these are very difficult to keep in pens because they can jump. They can really jump high. In fact, the problem with zoos is how do you keep the deer out? Because they can always jump the barrier and get inside the zoo and eat all the food that are supposed to be there for the other animals. And likewise, if you try to pen them in, you're going to have a really high fence to keep them in. And even then, they seem to be pretty clever at finding a way out. But in one sense, there's no need to put these creatures in pen. They thrive wherever human beings thrive. And because they thrive wherever human beings thrive, these are the ideal game animal. Wherever we live, they live, and if you need some meat, that will, they'll be available there for you to hunt. And what's wonderful about these creatures, they're large-bodied land mammals that are not dangerous to human beings. Now, that's not that way with a moose. When you hunt a moose, you get a good chance of being severely injured or killed by a moose if you make a mistake. A deer is not going to hurt you. And so it's really the ideal game animal because it's not going to hurt you, and they seem to live everywhere that we live. And then the text mentions the donkey. And the interesting thing about the donkey, unique to the donkey, is its capacity to transition from domestication to living in the wild. In fact, what it tells us in Job 39, if you lose your donkey, don't worry about it. If you find it 3 months later, it will immediately rebond to you. But during that 3 months, it'll be quite able to take care of itself. So it can immediately transition from being kept in a barn and then living completely on its own. And whether it be 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 6 months, it will rebond with you. Now, that's not true of the other farm animals we have. When they go wild, they stay wild. But the donkey will go from domestication to wild to domestication to... If you lose it 5 times, no problem. When you find it, it'll immediately go back to relating to you. Now, the other good thing about the donkey that's brought out in the book of Numbers is just how sensitive the donkey is to danger. This is why it can go from domestication to living in the wild, because of how highly sensitive it is to danger. If a horse is released from a pen or a stable and it's having to live a wild existence, it's not sensitive to the risks out there and therefore stands a good chance of not surviving. Same thing's true of sheep or cows. If they're put out there, they're not likely to survive the predation. But the donkey is immediately aware of the threats that are out there, and because of that, is also motivated to protect its human owner from harm and risk. And so it will sense danger and immediately move its human owner away from that danger. And so this is a good animal to have in terms of if you're walking around in places that have a lot of risk, it will do everything it can to protect you, to keep you from harm. And so you notice in the book of Numbers that an angel shows up in front of the donkey. The donkey sees the angel and tries to protect Balaam from the threat of that angel. But Balaam doesn't see the angel and therefore begins to beat the donkey. Well, you know the story. But the whole point is donkeys were designed that way in advance to keep us from danger. They're also highly sure-footed, and they can take us through places of difficult terrain and keep us, again, from that kind of harm. And then the text mentions the ox. Now, the ox, as Job 39 points out, is very difficult to tame. Really, of all the different kinds of oxen we see in the world, the only way you're going to tame them is to raise them from the time they come out of the womb. Then you can tame them. And if a tame adult gives birth, then you can continue to tame them that way. But an adult ox, you're not going to be able to tame. But the wonderful thing about oxen, they don't need protection or very little protection from predators. The problem with sheep is once they're domesticated, if a wolf breaks in, you've got some real issues. But because the ox is so big and strong, it can fend off the predators. In fact, in Africa, the buffalo that are there, the lions keep their distance. They're no match for a buffalo. The buffalo will take very good care of a lion. So they don't need much protection. And the other advantage is they enjoy doing heavy labor. Very different from my sons. These are creatures that really love to do heavy labor for their human owners. My uncle had cows. And he says, they were just looking forward to the opportunity to do heavy labor for him. They actually enjoy it. And so these are the creatures that God gave us to do the heavy labor. And if it wasn't for that, again, I don't think we've been able to launch our transportation system. These are the first creatures that humans use to move goods from one town to the other. And also, they seem to thrive everywhere we thrive. They can handle very cold climates as well as very warm regions, high humidity and low humidity. So an ideal farm animal. And moreover, we can breed them where they can produce 80 plus quarts a day of milk. They are the champion milk producer of all the mammals that God has given us. And they also produce the best quality leather of any animal that is out there. And in one sense, we can thank these oxen for keeping us away from the onset of the next ice age. You know, the pattern of the last 7 million years is that we get 90,000 years of ice, kind of what you've been seeing today as we moved into Glacier Bay, and then you get 10,000 years of interglacial. And that's what's ideal for us human beings. You don't want to be around during an ice age, at least not up here in Alaska or anywhere in Canada for that matter. But because of the domestication of cows, that domestication dramatically raised the amount of methane in Earth's atmosphere. And because of that dramatic increase in methane, we've literally put off the onset of the ice age by more than 5,000 years. So instead of 10,000 years of a warm interglacial, we've had about 15,000 years of a warm interglacial. And so cows are enabling us to maintain civilization at our level. And then the text mentions the ostrich. And you say, why on earth is the ostrich so important for human beings? Well, again, it serves our needs at the beginning of civilization and towards the end. Excuse me. Namely, the eggs. And the interesting thing about ostriches is they lay their eggs, and the male will sit on the eggs at night. It's black, so it's easily camouflaged. And the female ostrich is kind of a light brown, and so actually blends into the grass here. However, the ostrich cannot defend those eggs against hyenas and jackals. And so what they do, if they notice that there are hyenas and jackals around, they just simply beat it. Now, the small predators can't break through those eggs. Very heavy shell. Don't have to worry about the small predators, only the big predators. And in that case, their best strategy is simply to leave. But that gives an opportunity for humans to come in and take a few eggs. Now, they make nice omelets. Each egg is equivalent to a 24-egg omelet. But what the early humans would do is bore a little hole in it, and they'd get all the egg out, and then they would have a water container. Now, that was crucial because the early human beings noticed that they were at a serious disadvantage with respect to all the other predators. The other predators could run faster, had a better eyesight, better sense of smell, better sense of hearing, greater endurance. Their muscles were stronger, and they had bigger teeth. I mean, we were at the bottom of the pile in every respect as far as our capacity to hunt would go. We had one advantage and one advantage only. We were bipedal, which means, and we were thin. And our slender form and our bipedalism means that we have a lot of skin relative to our body weight, and unlike these other animals, we can perspire very efficiently. So as long as we got lots of water, we're in good shape, and the human species is the one species that's able to hunt in the hottest part of the day. Notice the lions don't hunt at that time. They wait for the sun to kind of drop a little bit before they hunt. Humans only can hunt in the heat of the day, but only if they've got water. And so what the early humans would do is they would fill up these ostrich eggs with water and put them all over their hunting area. So about every kilometer there would be a supply of water in an ostrich egg. And then they would purposely chase these herbivores in the hottest part of the day, and their goal was to chase them to the point where they got heat stroke and would collapse, and then they could kill. And they didn't have to worry about the lions coming in to take over their kill because they were so petered out from the heat. So thanks to ostriches, we've been able to survive quite well in that environment. And you say, how are they serving us today? Well, remember I was talking about the cows and how they're belching all this methane into the atmosphere and keeping things artificially warm. Now we're worried about global warming, right? Well, one of the ways we could deal with a global warming, assuming you want to keep using automobiles, is what we could do is stop eating hamburgers, okay? And maybe stop eating so much dairy products when we're adults, which means we could, lower dramatically the population of cows and then raise ostriches instead. Why ostriches? They produce red meat, just like beef. In fact, in my opinion, tastes better than beef, and has very low cholesterol, very low saturated fat. It's the meat of choice for diabetics. Well, what if the entire population were to start eating ostrich meat instead of beef? We would lower the methane content. Moreover, ostrich meat is about 10 times cheaper to produce than beef would be, presuming we can get the population of ostriches up to a decent level. It would be less than half the price of the cheapest meat in the market today, which is turkey meat that you get from turkeys that weigh more than 30 pounds. Okay, the horse. I'm taking a little more time. I'm going to speed this up a little bit. The horse is the ideal transportation animal, extremely loyal and obedient, and in fact it will sacrifice its health and even its life to serve its owner. Now, evolutionists will tell you that the donkey and the horse have a common ancestor, and as proof of that they'll say you can mate a donkey with a horse and get a mule. Obviously they're closely related physically, and this is a property of naturalistic evolution. Until you look at the differences in their soulish features. The horse is nothing like the donkey in the way it relates to human beings. You cannot ride a donkey into battle. When it sees those arrows, it heads the opposite direction. Its motivation is to keep you away from danger and harm. But a horse is extremely loyal and very courageous and will ride into battle. It doesn't care how many bullets are whizzing in its direction, spears or swords, it will take you into the most dangerous of situations, and if necessary, it will sacrifice its life in order to protect your life. A horse will do that, a donkey won't. And also, when I say the horse is the ideal transportation animal, we can ride donkeys, but your feet drag on the ground. You can ride a camel, but you're up so high, you're in danger of falling off and hurting yourself, and it's kind of hard to balance yourself on a camel. The horse is ideal in every respect as a personal transportation vehicle. Last of all, it mentions the hawk and the eagle. These are creatures that also can bond very strongly to their human owner, extremely loyal and obedient, and has the property that it will feed you before it feeds itself. And these are the most efficient predators in the sense that they can fly up and find game where it's extremely scarce. And you say, why does it mention the hawk and the eagle separately? Well, the hawk is an ideal falconry bird in heavily forested terrain. The way it's designed, it can make very sharp, quick turns in and out of the forest branches and trees and then pick up the prey. And the eagle is the one that's ideal in open terrain and literally can survey out several miles. In fact, the eyesight of these creatures is so good that they can see a rabbit from 2 miles away. Much more accurate eyesight than we human beings, and literally will be able to find that prey and literally will feed you first before it feeds. And again, this was very common in the early launch of human civilization. Job 38 and 39 describes these 10 creatures, each of which was created with a unique soulish feature to serve or please humans in a different way, each distinct. Again, something that the evolutionary model would never predict. It would predict that they would be related, but that's not what we see in their soulish characteristics. And in the book of Job, we have a debate going on, and early on in the debate, we have Job making this comment: ask the animals and they will teach you, or the birds of the air and they will tell you. And Job said this in the middle of his presentation of the plan of salvation as revealed in the record of nature. So he made specific mention of these mammals and birds. And the point that he was making in his debate with his friends, as it takes a higher being to tame the soulish animals, so also it takes a higher being to tame a human being. One of the points it makes is that we humans can tame all these birds and mammals, but we can't tame our own tongue. And we can't tame a proud man. Only God is able to do that. So if we can tame these lower creatures, it takes a higher creature to tame us. As they were created to serve and please us, so also we were created to serve and please God. But something gets in the way. As sin damages our relationships with soulish animals, so also it destroys our relationship with God. And let me just finish this off by saying what Job spoke about next is that there's a repair route that everyone has seen in the record of nature, but not necessarily understood. And let me just review for you what he was explaining to his friends. As they look at the record of nature, we can conclude in chapter 9, verse 10, that God must be extremely powerful in the way he's put together all the creatures on the face of the earth. He must be very wise in the way he's designed them to serve our needs. He must be extremely loving in the way he's designed them to bring us pleasure and joy. And God has given each one of us a law. Inside of every human being on our heart is a law that's been written that God requires us to obey. And we recognize that the more we try to obey that law, the more convinced we've become that we simply cannot obey the law that God has written in our heart. We fall short. But God loves us so much and is so powerful and is so wise, he has determined a means of redemption. And God alone is the one that is intelligent enough, wise enough, powerful enough, and loving enough to provide that means of redemption. And so what Job was able to conclude is that if he were to put his trust in God's redemption and only his redemption, that he would be saved from his inability to live up to the demands of his conscience. And my favorite verse in the book of Job, verse 19, I know that my Redeemer lives, and I will see him in my flesh on the last day. Now, the remarkable thing about Job is his humility. And you can say, okay, he was able to figure out all the basic elements of the plan of salvation through the record of nature, but that's only because of his remarkable humility. Notice that his friends were not able to discern what he was able to discern. He had the humility to comprehend and receive God's revelation through nature, and a question I would leave for us and the rest of humanity, do we have that humility? And what you see in the book of Job, the only way you can get that humility is to go to God and ask for it, and he will humble us so that we can understand what he's revealed to us and receive what he has so generously offered. If you want to read more about this in terms of the big picture, you can get our book, Why the Universe is the Way It Is, but we lay this out in some detail in our latest book, More Than a Theory. Thank you.
Okay, we actually have a few minutes for Q&A here today. So, Hannah, do you have a... No, you got one right here. We're going to be running around the room taking questions. So, anybody have a question? Yep.
Camels weren't on the list. I wouldn't put them on the list either, actually. But since they were there, why do you suppose they weren't on the list?
Why do I suppose camels didn't make the top 10 lists? I think they would have made the top 20 list, but not the top 10. And again, I was kind of going through this in a bit of a rush, and I left out a lot of the details. From my perspective, looking what I see in Job 38 and 39, I see these 10 creatures as really being at the top 10 in the context of where humanity was at the very launch of the human race. Where we are today, you might want to come up with a different list, but what you'll see in the book I'm working on is that each of these creatures serves our needs or brings us pleasure in a particular way at the beginning of human civilization and also at the end. So in one sense, the horse and the donkey a little bit ahead of what the camel is able to offer. Now, camels, of course, are ideal when you've got to cross large stretches of desert. But one of the interesting things is those stretches of desert weren't nearly as big when human beings first came upon the scene. We've made the Sahara Desert 10 times bigger than it was in the days of the Romans, and the Gobi Desert is 3 times bigger than it was in the days of the Romans. So today, maybe we've got a little more need for camel for transportation, but of course today we also got Hummers that can get us across the desert as well. So And the reason why I kind of mentioned the camel, you can ride camels. They can carry more weight than a horse, but it's really quite a challenge to ride a camel without hurting yourself. You really got to work well with that camel, and you can't just simply jump on a camel like you do a horse. I mean, what's wonderful about the horse is it's got the right muscular structure, it has the right height, you're high enough above that you can see what's going on, but not so high that if you fall off the horse you're going to kill yourself. With a camel you're going to do serious harm if you fall off, especially when it's running at high speed. And the other thing about horses is their endurance. They're able to transport you 150, 200 miles a day, because if you actually feed them the appropriate diet, they need an hour in the morning and an hour in the evening, and the rest of the time they can spend moving you across an expansive space. And that's not true of the donkey, and it's not true of the camel.
Hugh, the fact that the word bara is only used for soulish creatures and humans, do you think this adds credence to the theory of common descent that Michael Behe says he believes in and Francis Collins believes in?
Well, I'm arguing that when you look at the soulish animals, it completely undercuts this common descent idea. You know, the idea of common descent is looking at these physical features and trying to build phylogenetic trees. And so, for example, they would conclude that the zebra, the horse, and the donkey all must be descended from a common ancestor. And you can see how they're physically related. After all, you can make any one of those three creatures and get a zorse or get a mule or a zebras. I mean, you can do all that. But when you look at their soulish features, radically different. So I didn't talk about the zebra, but the way a zebra relates to human beings is very different than either the donkey or the horse. So, and from an evolutionary perspective, as Charles Darwin pointed out, the soulish features should match the physical features, and they don't. There's a discontinuity. And so, in that sense, I would argue that this is a powerful argument to defeat the idea of common natural descent. And the idea is that all this was put into place before we human beings even show up on the scene. Again, there's no evolutionary pressure to encourage these creatures to adopt these characteristics, because we weren't even there at the time that they show up.
Dr. Ross, thank you for the lecture. Have there been any naturalistic or evolutionary type of arguments to what you're saying as to why these animals would have this predisposition to serving us? Have they come up with any type of theories, and if so, how have you responded?
Well, the first scientific studies exposing how these creatures relate to us in ways they don't relate to one another only since last April has anything like this been showing up in the scientific literature. So in that sense, there hasn't been a response yet from people who take a non-theistic perspective on these creatures. In fact, what these authors pointed out is up till now, people have bought the party line of Charles Darwin. What I find interesting is that you've got a reputable scientific journal receiving a paper with the title Darwin's Mistake. So in that sense, I think the Darwinian model is in real trouble as this research continues. And the thing I notice is that both the team of neuroscientists at UCLA and UC San Diego are highly motivated to continue this research. And so I think we're going to be seeing a number of papers coming out. And it's interesting, all these researchers are evolutionists, but they're quite honest in pointing out that this does not fit the Darwinian paradigm to such a degree that they're willing to put the title on their paper, Darwin's Mistake. That's the first time I've ever seen in the scientific literature that title on a paper.
Dr. Ross, thank you. You just mentioned what I was asking about, the phylogenetic tree and the high emphasis on evolution that pervades biology. Do you think that that's going to limit the knowledge that's discovered, or are we going to be able to just cull through it and continue to find more reasons every day as you already do?
Well, I mean, as my colleague here, Buzz Rana, would point out, there's growing difficulty trying to maintain these phylogenetic trees even at the physical level. Thanks to genomics, I mean, now we can try to build these genetic clocks to try to support what's going on, what we see in the fossil record, and it doesn't fit. From an evolutionary perspective, you would anticipate getting the same results looking at the DNA similarities of these creatures along with the way their bones are structured, their fossil skeletal structures, and it's not fitting. The evolutionary model would demand that they must fit. Well, what I've been pointing out this afternoon, we've got a second problem from an evolutionary perspective. The Soulish features likewise don't fit what we see in the phylogenetic trees developed looking only at the physical characteristics. So the fact that we're seeing all these discontinuities at a physical level as well as at a Soulish level and a genetic level, I think if we just let this run for a few more years, the Darwinian model will be history. Not that atheism will be gone. After all, we have the Santa Fe Institute, who are ardent atheists, but just as ardent in saying Darwin is wrong, that model is wrong, but they're appealing to something that in my opinion is even more absurd. They're saying that there are hidden laws of physics that explain all these features we see in these different forms of life. From an astronomer's perspective, if those laws of physics exist, we'd be seeing them in the universe, and we don't see them. Matter of fact, if they did exist, it would be a proof against life existing in the universe. So the fact that we're all here proves that there aren't these hidden laws of physics. But I think what you're going to see in the next few months and years is that the atheistic community is going to bifurcate into many different competing models. So it's not just going to be a couple of models. You'll see several models in their attempt to scramble to find some response to this new scientific evidence for the God of the Bible.